I'm Mark Upton from Sports Relations with a bit more on practice design for maximising the development of your players in team sports and particularly in talent pathway youth levels. And we'll continue to use football or slash soccer as a case study, I suppose, but all the principles we talk about here basically apply to all team sports. So last week we introduced the idea of perception-action coupling and a study on that about how perception can influence action. And by coupling those two things together, i.e. having to perceive what's happening on the field and then make a decision, then perform a technique or an action, what we're really doing is increasing how representative that task that you're doing in practice, say passing, receiving the ball and passing, how representative that is of that task in a real match. And research and theories support the importance of that resemblance or representation in terms of the transfer from what you do in practice to players being able to do that in a real match situation. And so that's also been called representative task design, which I've done previous video blogs on before that you can search for as well to find out a bit more about that. But the discussion that's come up in the last week and a few questions about then, okay, what's the balance then? Because normally if we do tasks that are a bit more representative, either via small-sided games and those sort of things, we generally decrease the repetitions we could perhaps get if we're doing isolated technique and particularly cone-to-cone type work. And I can't give you a magic formula or the exact balance of what it should be, but perhaps we could use this 4-corner matrix here just to look at things and for you to consider when you're designing your own practice activities and sessions, or perhaps reviewing what you've done in the past to look at the value of each. And so on this horizontal axis, we go from activities in practice that are less representative, resemble the game in only a small way, up to more representative, highly representative of what the real game looks like. And then on the vertical axis, we've got the repetitions, so going from low reps to high reps. So where does the balance exist? And so traditionally, if we start down in the corner that we really want to avoid, we've got these type of activities where it's not really representative of the game, because if we look last week and we talked about coupling perception with action here, that these actions are all premeditated. There's no need for perceptual skills because the cones tell us what the action needs to be. I've got to dribble around the cones and they're premeditated. Premeditated is always an ugly word when it comes to practice design for team sports that are random and dynamic and variable. And so what's worse about this is we've got a long line of kids standing around doing nothing while one player goes through. So we're actually getting low repetitions. So it's not very match-like, and there's not even very many repetitions. Want to avoid, where possible, anything that falls into that. And then moving on to probably what is the traditional type of approach to practice and the beliefs of many coaches historically is getting higher reps, so just high repetition, and this is a lot of the deliberate practice theory that is very misguided in some ways for team sports. So we're getting high reps of passing here, but again, it's not representative of the real match situation. There's no perceptual skills needed, there's no decisions to be made, there's no opposition players to be seen. So, down in the other corner, we move on to now tasks and activities in practice are more representative of the real match. But this is where if we're creating a game, for example, we have to be aware of things like numbers, playing numbers in those games, because with too many numbers, and particularly the younger your players you go, I think, the less touches on the ball they're going to get. So very realistic or more realistic and representative of a real match, but lower repetitions. And then finally, what I think is the optimal corner to be in that we should be aiming for, and generally small-sided games create it, but it doesn't have to be a game. You can still achieve this corner here where we're getting high reps of tasks such as receiving and passing that are representing the game. So it's a great picture here of what the player with the ball has to deal with, perception, decision-making, and performing actions as well, with defenders, teammates, goals involved. Okay, so all those values are small-sided games. So the one other point, then, is that we can perhaps move this corner here a little bit more, nudge it to the right, make it a bit more representative by making this type of practice variable. So rather than stationary back and forward practice where the length of the pass and type of the pass is exactly the same, perhaps by just having the pair of players moving randomly around a field or an area, or introducing 3 players that can move into any way and any position to receive the ball, creates different lengths and types of passes. So that's variable practice. So perhaps that has a bit more value than just constant practice. But in general, here's certainly the corner we want to aim for as much as we can. Here's the one we definitely want to avoid as much as we can. And these 2 other forms, they will play a role. They'll be in your practices at times. How much, I'm not sure. But again, that's probably for you to work out as a coach. And finally, what's interesting is if we split it down the middle based on doing activities that are more representative, i.e. games, small games in practice versus traditional drills, studies, particularly on youth soccer academies, so not talking just participation level, but supposedly academies that are trying to develop and enhance and foster talented players, still do spend the majority of their time doing drills rather than games. And I think this is very similar across a number of sports from what I read and see and hear about. And in cricket, in fact, the same researchers did a similar study and found 100% of drills, and 0 games. So whilst we're aiming for this corner here, the research says current practices still don't align with that. So there's a lot of improvement, and that probably starts with awareness. So that's just been some more information on practice design that you've hopefully found helpful. As I've mentioned, I'm available in a consulting capacity to help out teams, clubs, individual coaches in a variety of ways so that they can design practice to optimally develop their players. So please get in touch for any of those options or just to ask a question in general. So Mark Upton from Sports Relations, thanks for listening.